Hello and welcome to another mini how-to series on some stuff about wheels. In particular, wheels you're likely to be using if you're racing triathlon and you want to get a bit of extra speed. This one is going to be about gluing tubular tyres. So something that looks a little like this. Previous ones have covered valve extenders and bits and pieces, and there's a couple other different ones, but this one's going to look at what to do when you want to install a new set of fast tyres. So, we're going to start off with a carbon rim, because chances are if you're using a tubular tyre you're going to have a carbon rim. If you're using a tubular tyre on an aluminium rim, you definitely don't need me to tell you how to glue it, because you've probably been gluing tyres for a very long time. The things I like to do, there's lots of different advice about how to glue tubular tyres and what to do with it, but sometimes they miss a bit of the basics, which is what I want to cover. First step you need to do is you bought your tyre from the shop. When you buy it, before you install it, you want to put it on your tyre with no glue, put it on your wheel with no glue, sorry. You want to pump it up and you want to leave it for a bit of time. It's going to be quite difficult to seat on the tyre, almost like your regular clincher tyre, which you're probably used to using, as you're probably not going to use tubular tyres as your first tyre. And when you pump it up, you'll see it's really held on quite rigidly, because it'll sit in the groove quite nicely, and the pressure is actually what holds it onto the wheel. The glue is really there for, if you get a puncture, to stop the tyre rolling off. So, first of all, if you've got worries about your tubular tyres rolling off if you pour gluing, or if you do a poor gluing job, sorry, then don't be afraid. It'll hold on really quite solidly with a bit of pressure. That doesn't mean to say that you can do a rubbish gluing job, but it's not absolute disaster. If you do get a puncture though, and you've glued it on really well, it'll stay on, which is a distinct advantage of tubular tyres over clinchers. First off, tape versus glue. You can get sort of rim tape, which you just stick on. It's very easy to apply, it's not a problem. It should hold it on fairly securely. I wouldn't want to use it for applications such as cyclocross, where you want it really securely on, but it'll do a good enough job for triathlon. I don't tend to use tape because it has higher rolling resistance, generally speaking, so if you tape a tyre on, it's not going to be as low on the CRR front as if you glue it on, and that's basically why I like using glue. There's several different methods to gluing tyres that are quite popular. I'm going to do, essentially, I use a slightly thicker glue, which is the Continental glue, and use their factory supplied method, as supposedly from the research I've done that's quite good at getting a low rolling resistance. If you use a bit of a thinner glue like the Vittora Mastic stuff, you probably want to look into all the different methods that have been trialled with that, as that's been around a long time and the factory method isn't necessarily the quickest. Regardless of what method you're doing, whether you're gluing, whether you're taping, the first thing I like to do is get the rim really clean, get it nice and get all the old residue and all the old glue off. And this is a right pain in the arse, and this is a bit of a disaster if you've used tape before, if you've used glue before, because it'll take ages to clean it. Be careful, because you'll get carbon splinters coming out and all sorts of bits and pieces that's not very nice. You also have to be careful what you're using to clean it, because carbon, the epoxy resin that's holding the fibres together that makes up carbon fibre, is going to be susceptible to environmental corrosion from things that degrade glues, because effectively glues tend to be polymer based just as the epoxy resin is. So you do have to pick something specific that's going to clean it, that isn't going to damage the wheel. So do be careful on that. Once you've got it nice and clean, then it's time to sort of think about gluing it. Always the first thing to do, and something you should, useful to have around the workshop, get a set of latex gloves, or non-latex if you're allergic, because you don't want the glue going on your hands. Paintbrush to apply it, and your glue. And the method I use is a thin coat on the wheel. So you go around, you'll apply a thin coat, getting a good even coverage, trying not to get any in the spoke holes. When you've done that, hang your wheel up on an appropriate place to hang it. Fortunately I have a handy motorcycle wheel stand here. Leave that for 24 hours. At this point, it's fair to say I've made a slight error there. You should also put a thin coat of glue on the tub and then leave that for 24 hours as well. When you come back to it 24 hours later, the next day, you take your tyre, and your tubular tyre will have a cotton strip in the middle underneath the actual tyre itself. You then stick another coat of glue on the tyre itself, and then mount it to the rim. Pump it up. I usually like to pump it up to sort of about half what I'm going to do, so 40-50 psi. Centre it on the rim so that you don't have any of the cotton showing. And at that time, with that coat on the rim, on the tyre, sorry, that'll be really quite easy to centre. It'll move and it'll shuffle around, but you do have to, if you're using this particular method in the Continental glue, you do have to have a bit of speed while you're doing it, because it does set relatively quickly. But you can you can layer it and you can move it and you can fiddle about with it until you have it nice and central. Check both sides, pump it fully up, spin it around, and then you can check if it's out of balance top to bottom or side to side, and then you can go around and reset it. And then I like to pump it up to sort of a middling pressure, probably about 60-70 psi, leave it again for another 24 hours, come back to it the next day, and it should be good to ride. And that's pretty much all there is to it. If you're using a thinner bonding agent like Vittora Mastic, then the best methods are supposedly putting 4 or 5 different coats on over a course of days, weeks and months. But if you use some of the thicker Continental stuff, there'll be a link, if you've come to this from my website, of what I've used and the method I've used. Then it takes a little bit less time, which is generally better all round. So the finished article. It's got a nice even coverage of glue all the way around. It's good to try not to get it in the spoke holes, as that will cause a little bit of an out of balance rotation if you've got a bit of a mass of glue in there, but it's not too much bother. It's always good to try and clean it off the brake track, because that's going to be horrible when you start braking. So it's good to sort of do that before you leave it 24 hours and let it dry. But other than that, as long as you've got your nice even coverage all the way around, clean it up, get off the brake track, leave it for 24 hours, and then you can do your tyres.